Hello, I am Elisabeth Donnelly, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2023 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival day for a conversation with Selby Wynn Schwartz and Gail Tsukiyama. If you are in New York City next week, the in-person festival takes place on October 1st in downtown Brooklyn. Before I begin, I want to let you know that books by the authors in this program can be purchased in the link below. And for a little more about our panelists, Selby Wynn Schwartz holds a PhD in comparative literature from the University of California, Berkeley. She's the author of The Bodies of Others, Drag Dancers in Their Afterlives, a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award, and the forthcoming novella, A Life in Chameleons. Her most recent release is After Sappho, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize in 2022. Gail Tsukiyama was born in San Francisco, California, to a Chinese mother from Hong Kong and a Japanese father from Hawaii. She attended San Francisco State University, where she earned her Bachelor of Arts degree and a Master of Arts degree in English. She is a best-selling author of 7 previous novels, including Women of the Silk. Oh, it's 8. Gail is the best-selling author of 8 previous novels, including Women of the Silk, The Samurai's Garden, and most recently, The Brightest Star. She has received the Academy of American Poets Award and the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award. She divides her time between El Cerrito and Napa Valley, California. Thank you for being here, and let's start having a conversation. Okay, and both of your books are in an interesting dialogue as you're both reaching back into the past, writing historical infused novels that are about a variety of topics. And I leave it to you guys to describe it a little bit more vivaciously. But let's start with just what was the spark of inspiration for both of you to write your books? And if you want to include a sentence about like, after Sappho is X and The Brightest Star is Y, that'd be great.
Gail, do you want to start? I was going to allow you to start since she... All right, I'll dive in. So I'm not good at the one sentence after Sappho is X. Maybe we could just leave it as after Sappho is X. After Sappho is kind of an attempt to write a collective feminist biography for a group of women or people who at that time were identifying as women, who wanted to have their own lives, and they were mostly living in Europe and the UK around the turn of the century, and they wanted to be artists and writers and people who had their own lives. And the spark of inspiration was probably finding out about a quite obscure, I think unjustly obscure person who was a woman and a poet and a playwright who was queer, named Lina Poletti. She was Italian, and she was a figure I think should be known, and I should have known her. You know, as you said, I went to grad school in comparative literature. I didn't find out about her until fairly recently, and I kind of fell in love with her and wanted there to be more about her. There's not very much left. And so I started imagining what I wanted there to be, so that there would be more. And that kind of made a life for her. And that life was overlapping with other lives of the people in her time, the women in her time. And their lives started interlinking. And then I had all these questions about the nature of biography, which I realized later were basically some of the same questions that Virginia Woolf already had and kind of answered in the new biography from 1927. So I was coming very late to the party. So I think those were falling in love with Lina Poletti, having some questions that I probably should just have looked to Virginia Woolf to answer, and having, actually, now that I know about your poetry background, Gail, having read Anne Carson and just feeling in awe of what poets can do that I can't, and wishing I could.
Yeah. The Brightest Star. I wish I could be as deep as Selby and her explanation. Mine's a little more lighthearted in the sense that I was watching the series Killing Eve, and I don't know if anybody out there has watched it, but I was just enchanted with the idea that they had an Asian actress play the main role as Eve. And she's in London and she works for the MI6, and could be any actress, and usually would be any actress. So I was kind of enchanted with the fact that they used Sandra Oh, and I thought it's got me thinking, and what Selby just said about falling in love is really so important to sitting down and writing a book for several years, let's say. You have to fall in love with that character or the idea, the place, whatever you've chosen to write about. So I started thinking, and I said to myself, who was the first Asian American actress who made it in Hollywood? And it always starts, I think, for all of us, it's like the seed of curiosity. Who was that person? How did they do this? Why did they do this? And having the Chinese background, I'm half Chinese, half Japanese, but I was brought up in the Chinese culture. So I had all that background, and I'm thinking, how did this Hollywood actress, be it Chinese or Japanese, actually kind of fly through all of the cultural stuff too, on top of the Hollywood stuff? So that was kind of the seed that got me really curious about who it was, how to do this. So I started reading. And the other little thing is, before I actually jumped in poetry, I thought I wanted to make films. That was my great passion growing up. So I'm this little kid, 10 years old, and my excuse for watching movies all night was that I was going to be a filmmaker. So I would watch old movies, all night long, because they didn't come on till like 1 or 2 a.m. And that's why mornings are hard for me until now. And so I've been watching all these movies. And as I began researching, I realized, Anna May Wong. Yeah, I know her. I saw her in a movie when I was a little kid, and I was watching Shanghai Express.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember thinking, there's an Asian in this movie, and it's black and white and made in the 1930s, but it kind of flew in and out of my mind till I went back and started researching it and realized that it was Anna May Wong who was really the first international Hollywood movie actress, Asian American movie actress at the time. And so that just kind of, the doors flew open for me.
That's so, and she was, some of her films were pre-Hays Code too. So it's just this very interesting era of when the movies were happening. Which is
she started in the silent movies, and she knew, by 9 years old, that this is what she wanted to do, because she would skip school and go watch the silent movies at the Nickelodeons back then for 5 cents. She'd save her lunch money, or her father owned a laundry, and she would save the delivery tips that she got to go see these movies. And she just knew from the time she was 9, I'm going to be a movie star. As naive, I guess we all have to be pretty naive in the arts to want to do something so badly that we keep doing it, regardless of what's right in front of us.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think one thing that both books kind of speak to too, and I think with Anna May Wong, it's sort of immediate. And so you have like so many characters in your book that it's amazing. Got to take notes. And I think, well, with Anna May Wong, she had to, the degree of costuming she had to deal with Hollywood, where she would see yellow face with white actors, and kind of took a very long journey to be in a movie where she felt like fully herself. And I think, Selby, for your book, like many of your characters are maybe trying to find their own path when things like marriage loom. And I just wanted to see how you both as writers sort of explored the way that these central characters would find limitations and yet played with them, and what was what made your writer mind work with those realistic aspects of their stories?
Selby?
Oh, you get to start this one, I think.
I've been talking. Where should I begin on this? So much of it again is going back to the fact that I was not only interested how she kind of worked her way through all the laws that were in place at that time too, the anti-miscegenation laws, the Hollywood placed on the actors that were, on the regular actors, we're talking on Caucasian actors, they had so many limitations. When it came to Asian American, that was a whole nother set of laws. But I was thrilled the fact that she just didn't let anything stop her. And I think another part of being a writer is that you kind of embrace what you admire about characters. And one of the things that I admired was this perseverance that she kept doing it, because I knew I wouldn't. I would have probably stopped at a certain point and said, this is too hard, I can't do this. But she just kept going until she achieved what she hoped she could have achieved, only to realize she couldn't achieve it. As hard as she tried and as far as she ran. So all of that kind of went into when I started working on the book in it itself. But she from the age of, I'd say 9, when she went home and she said, I'm going to be a movie actress, it was completely against what her family and cultural upbringing that she was supposed to do. And that had a great influence on me writing about her also, because it wasn't just the Hollywood stuff. It was how she fought her culture, her parents, what they were placing on her. And all he had wanted for her to do for many years, I would say from 11 to 18, was to marry her off. That was the only way that she would be saved. Yeah. That and culturally in every way, he thought she was bringing shame to the family. And if she married, the shame would go away. And he was desperate to do it, because he thought the more movies she makes, the more shame she's bringing upon herself, upon the family, then she couldn't have a good marriage. What are we going to do with her, kind of thing. But and she lived in this kind of atmosphere constantly, because she lived at home and all the kids were behind the laundry. They had a little house and they all lived in that house. And it was dealing with that night and day, on top of the fact that she had to go to school. She had to find a way to watch movies, that she could learn her craft, so it was all of that I think just was inspiring to me, because I think that as an Asian American woman born in the San Francisco Bay Area, having grown up here at a time where you think everything is so simple and easy, it isn't. You carry your culture from the time you're born, I believe. So the Chinese culture has always kind of weighed heavy, regardless of how far away you try to run from it. So I couldn't imagine what she might have had to gone through to just get to the next step, because every day she went home and fought her father, also, not just Hollywood. Selby, you want to jump in now?
Yeah, it's a very inspiring story, and I liked the way you put in the question that that her father had, which is, what should we do with her? This kind of disposing of, it's like, well, the problem that is her, this potential to bring shame, and the kind of distribution, like, well, we should do something with her as a object, as a good or something. And I think that's very resonant with a lot of the situations that the characters I was writing about were also encountering, was the kind of, like, there were ideas about what should be done with them, and those ideas in general were not the ideas that the people who were my characters had for themselves. They wanted to have and do and be and become things that were not in the line of what should we do with her. And I think it's important, as you say, to think about like in the case of many of the characters I'm writing about, it was much easier for them because most of them were white, some of them were heiresses. That makes it easier. So the characters who were working class, who were racialized, who were gender nonconforming, or whose sexuality was not acceptable in their environments or in their families, you know, it was not an easy undertaking to say, I'm going to, I mean, I guess I think of it as I'm going to become myself. But I think when you're talking about Anna May Wong and being 9 years old and thinking, there's also a way of like looking for models. Like, I am going to become myself, but how do I know what that is without being 9 years old and going to see on the screen or on the page or whatever it is, some path that says how what is that form, even what is that genre, what is that medium. And I think maybe that's something something I thought about as well, about how my characters looked for forms and models that they could follow, because the dominant model was like, why don't you be a good girl?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Anna May too, I think the real thing that the real earthquake in her life when she was young was when she was on set, because they were making a lot of movies in the alleyways of Chinatown in LA, because suddenly the Oriental exoticism became the big deal. And so they started making movies, even though they weren't using Asians in them. So that time that she actually sees for the first time a white actress in yellowface, and she thinks from a distance that there's an Asian actress here. You know, it's that idea of having somebody, a role model, you know, yeah. Will she teach me? Will she, you know, help me? You know, this is what she's thinking. And as she gets closer, she realizes she's more a monster looking than she is an Asian person. And I think that really shakes up Anna May Wong at that age. To hope that there was somebody, like you said, that could be a role model for her. And instead it was opposite. Yeah. It was somebody dressed up to be Asian who wasn't Asian. And she's looking at her and thinking, now what am I going to do? Kind of feeling that they won't even let Asians be in films. You know, so all that was just, I want to say fascinating, but frightening in a way. I can imagine what she thought when she saw that. I mean, she had a coarse wig. She was overly made up. Her eyes were pulled up and taped, you know, things like that. And from a distance, for a moment, she thought, this woman's going to help me. It's an Asian actress, and I've never seen an Asian actress before. You know, so all that was fascinating in terms of the obstacles that were kind of thrown at her early on. And I do think too, when you're actually going through things, don't you think that it doesn't feel as much as an obstacle? It's more like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. I've got to get over this. I'm just going to move forward. You know, if I think a lot about, you know, being a writer. I'm now thinking that if I knew how difficult it is sometimes, it makes you wonder, would you have ever written? Yes, I guess you would, because you cannot not write that feeling. And I think it was for Anna May too. She could not be a movie actress, regardless.
Just for a slightly generalized question, but for both of your books, where did the voice come for your story? Selby, your book is a bit more fragmentary and has a we sometimes, and Sappho comes back and forth throughout it. And Gail, you went with more of a first person perspective, which is also kind of an interesting thing in regards to biography.
Yes. What was I thinking? Is what I'm thinking now. You know, I knew that when I began the book that one of the things I was really worried about is capturing her voice. I had no idea. You know, I mean, films made back in the 20s and 30s and even the 40s, the acting is so exaggerated. as opposed to the reality of real acting nowadays. You know, how you try to make it as real as possible. In those days, it was much more exaggerated. Well, in silent films, you had to show everything, right? And then when it moved into the 30s and 40s, there was still the way they spoke. It was exaggerated, things like the way they moved. And I knew that that's not what I was looking for. And I was able to read a lot of letters that she had written to her really good friend, Carl Van Vechten, and his wife. And they lived in New York, and they were in the arts, and his wife, Fania, was an actress. And she met them a little bit later in her life, in her 30s. But she wrote voraciously in terms of writing letters. Because her family were Chinese, they destroyed all the letters that came to her. So and I'm thinking, I really needed those letters, if I'm going to find this voice. And of course, as you're researching, I found out that all his archival letters were at Yale.
Yeah.
And it's right during the pandemic, so I couldn't go. And I just was hoping, I hope it's on the web. I hope I could somehow. And of course, I emailed and I talked to the librarian there, and they were able to send me the files of letters, just the files of Anna May Wong. I mean, he had thousands and thousands of letters. And I read those letters over and over. And fortunately, it's the letters that she wrote to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my letters in the book are exaggerated. They're not, what she had written in those letters. But what I did get from the letters was her voice, the tone, how at times how she looked at things. But because truthfully, she was also a Chinese American, and there were a lot of things she didn't say out loud. Mm. That was quite stifled in the sense of when her sister committed suicide, and when Carl wrote to her about it, and said he was so sorry and everything. And when she wrote back, in one line, it's been devastating to the family. I'm sorry, I can't talk about this now. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, Anna May, talk about it. So I talked about it. And it's those kind of things. And it's the first time I've ever written about a real person. And it was terrifying for me in that sense. So I felt more comfortable by taking on her persona. And the prologue of the book, it's one page. And I wrote that after I read all her letters. I didn't know where it was going to go in the book. I thought it would be at the end of the book. And then I thought, well, maybe this will be the prologue. And how can I get her grown-up voice, the end of her life voice, in it throughout the book? And then I realized that it would have to be in first person. It's always one step forward, 3 steps back when you're writing. It's experimenting with voice, with first person, second person, everything is an experiment. And sometimes you can't find out exactly what the voice is or who the person is until you're halfway or 3/4 through the book. And then you go back and seed it. But after I wrote that one prologue page, I realized that her voice seemed important to me as the writer. And hopefully it would translate over to the reader.
Yeah, I think it's so true about the experimenting. But also the research, I liked so much the way you said that about letting the voice come to you from reading and reading and reading the letters, and sort of almost the voice coming out of the letters and becoming something that you could work with, at least maybe even inhabit, and I think I don't know why I knew that there was going to be a we, but I didn't know that from the beginning. I can't really explain what that was. It was just, I have ideas about it now. It's like, I thought there could be a chorus, but not the kind of chorus that just stands on the side, like in classical theater and laments and watches. I wanted there to be a chorus that was partly participatory, like a chorus to whom and for whom things happened. So in that sense, the chorus or the we was going to be more central, but the we in my book is also, it's very young when we begin. Like they're really young, and they don't know how to they don't know how to do this, and so they make some mistakes along the way, and they learn things, and they experiment, just like as you were saying, Gail. I think we do as writers, and they look to the characters who were really historical figures. So the we is my kind of imagining of like a spectrum of personae. They're not all the same, but they are a collective, and they do learn together, and they do sort of have a relational dynamic with the characters who are named, who were real, real people, Colette and Natalie Barney and that kind of thing. And the we, yeah, so I guess there's this sort of in-betweenness, I think. Maybe that's what I should say about the we. That's the way I imagined that sort of fulcrum of what is happening in them. They're becoming, but it's also about what they're learning from reading and watching and interacting and coming together over time.
And it's also sort of, I think, so much of what we have of women's lives in history is often very fragmentary. So it's sort of, how do you create and play with and create new history when you're sort of working with fragments? And I think that's applicable to both of your books, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, well, yes, it's very fragmentary, so I guess I sort of brought that on. So, well, part of it is what we have left of Sappho is in fragments, and I'm sure that Sappho as a poet did not intend to have her, her books and books of poetry reduced to tiny shreds that we have, but that's what we have. And that's what the characters in my book had as well. They only had shreds, really, these tiny bits of lines. So there's something kind of romantic about the fragment. It feels like it's been broken open just for you. You can interpret it, here it is, this broken thing, but you can make it whole by kind of picking it up yourself, and turning it around in your hands and making it mean something. So there's maybe a tension there between like what Sappho's poetry might have been like for her or for people in her time, and then by 1900 or something, what in particular this group of women could do with it. And so in a way, like they reanimated Sappho for their own purposes. And so I guess I'm a little bit doing the same thing in a sense, reanimating Sappho, probably for my own investments and desires as well. So I probably also fall prey a little bit to the allure of the fragment that you can do things with. But what else about the fragment? I don't know, it makes tiny little pieces, and the pieces are not totalizing. So they make a kind of, mosaic or something, a collage where they fit together in a way that's not one neat whole thing that starts at the beginning and goes straight through chronologically to the end. It's more like a piecing together of bits, and I may be more interested in that than, or maybe I just couldn't write exactly that whole thing where a narrative goes straight through, that kind of, yeah.
Well, I think it's very interesting because obviously Selby is really fragmented, and he has a lot of characters, and so this is all these lives coming together. And I've chosen to do the opposite in a way, in balancing hers with mine, which is one person's life, but in the same sense with the fragments. That's all we really have when we're writing about a real person. I mean, I could never have Anna May Wong's whole story. There's the bits and pieces you collect and you put it together, because I did it very linear, which is opposite sounding from yours, which is kind of interesting how you take fragments and you put it together. But Anna May Wong, now, when I'm listening to you in the fragments of all these characters, she was so fragmented in the sense of the wanting to be an actress, Asian American. She was never Chinese enough for the Chinese, never American enough for the Americans. She couldn't be a leading lady because she could never kiss a leading man. It's all these little fragments of her life, and how she portrayed herself was very fragmented too. Now, when I think about it, she was constantly thinking of how to keep herself in the limelight, which she had to do because she could never be in a leading lady in the movies. So she decided that she would take studio photos. And in those studio photos, she would portray all the different aspects of who she was. All these fragments. She would be the Western woman by wearing a tuxedo and top hat. She wore the first set of culottes, which they called the American businesswoman outfit suit. She wore Chinese cheongsams. She wore, and American evening gowns, and she took hundreds and hundreds of photos, studio photos, and they got into the movie magazines. The movie magazines were huge in those days. But now that I put it all together, I mean, those are all fragments of who she was. She was able to create this by putting herself in different situations. Her first film, she was 17. She went to Frances Marion, who was the scriptwriter of the film, and she said, I want to portray this character in a certain way. And she said, what way? And she says, I'll show you in our next meeting. And what she did was she used the costumes and she used hairstyles. By changing them, she defined the character. When the character is happy, she wears light colored clothes, brighter clothes. And she has the bangs of the maiden childhood hairstyle that Chinese have. When she's unhappy, she's wearing darker clothes, and she pulls her hair back into a bun like an older married woman would. Not to say that just because she's married, she's unhappy, but, just to define the periods in her life. So I thought as you're talking about the fragments, I'm seeing that rather than having a lot of little fragments in different people, she was so fragmented in one person. So, and it was just finding a way to kind of glue it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, but it seems like also what you're saying about the fragments is that in a way it was part of her screen gift as well, that she could present. She could say, oh, now I look like this and I am this character, and now I look like this and I am this character. Yeah. There's something useful about it too.
That's really and it's just fragments. It's always shocking to live your life and then to realize because of who you are when you're living that people might understand you in fragments, which I feel like is very much a part of existence, which is, yeah, always shocking.
It's almost like social media, isn't it? All these little fragments that go out into the world when you text, when you do this, when you do that. That's more frightening to me, actually, to put a little stuff of you and it goes out in the big, greater world. And
yeah, it's definitely working more these days. I did want to ask you guys about, so the archives, you need to go through much archival material for both of your books, and what were some of the surprises you were finding? What were some of the darlings you had to kill? And just what was the pleasure of the archives with your writing?
Well, the pleasure of the archives. I mean, the pleasure of the archives is the pleasure of the archives. You never know what you're. I mean, I was on the edge of my chair. I have to say, Gail, when you said the story about, okay, and all the letters are at Yale, and then the pandemic, and it's like, is this going to be a heroic librarian story? I hope so. So I'm so glad.
What will we do without our librarians?
They're heroic. Yes. Even when it's not a global pandemic, I really feel like we can't thank them enough for all of the work that they do in the archivists.
Yeah, and getting us the information we need.
Yes. So I'm very grateful. Yeah, the pleasure of the archive is that you don't know what you're going to find until you get into it, and then I guess that produces, as you were saying, Elisabeth, that produces the problem of having too many fantastic things, or all the things don't fit together, and then you have to figure out which thing. And I was trying to think about your question, what didn't make it, and I think maybe I can tell you a little story about Sarah Bernhardt, the actress. So Sarah Bernhardt, is a French actress. She was born. Her mother was a courtesan and also was Jewish. So she grew up sort of under some clouds of what people thought she could be or should be because of her family. And she wanted to be an actress very early on, and really worked. I'm thinking about these, the perseverance and the determination. She really worked to make herself into an actress. She was told over and over that she was wrong for the role. She had the wrong body. She was racialized in different disturbing ways, but she was fantastically successful and had this sort of diva career, and really enjoyed being a diva and kept a pet alligator and that kind of thing. So that was Sarah Bernhardt. She was a rock star. When she was 50 years old, so she was at the height of her career, she'd already really triumphed. She'd had the pet alligator and the personalized train cars and everything. She went with a friend of hers who was a painter to an island that's in Brittany in France. It was a day trip in the summer. And the island is called Belle-Île-en-Mer, which is the beautiful island in the sea. And the people of Belle-Île are always saying, it's called Belle-Île because it's a beautiful island. So that's what it's called, Belle-Île de bien nommé. The beautiful island, which is well named, the beautiful island of the sea. So she went there. She went to the very north tip of the island with her friend, the painter Georges Clairin, and there was an abandoned fort there. And she said, "I'll take it." So she bought the fort. And the people of Belle-Île were maybe a little suspicious of this, the diva who comes for the summer, she buys the fort, it's a caprice or whatever. Every summer for the next 29 years, Sarah Bernhardt spent the whole summer in her fort, which she did redecorate, having her summer life. And she was extremely attached to the place. And the story that I left out, which I really do like, so I'm glad I get to tell you, is that in 1911, so some years after she had been going every summer, in 1911, there were terrible winter storms on Belle-Île, which lived mostly from fishing, and the fisher people couldn't go out to sea in the winter. And there was a great worry that, they couldn't fish, they didn't have anything to eat. And they wrote to Sarah Bernhardt, who was in Paris for the winter, and they asked if she would help. And she, at that point, had a theater in her own name, the Sarah Bernhardt Theater. And she, which is now the Châtelet. And she said, "Yes, I will have a gala. It will be called the Winter Bread of the Fishermen Gala." She performed. She made everybody that she knew come and give money. She took all the money. She sent it back to Belle-Île, and she bought a little piece of land in one of the villages and built a cooperative bakery there. And the bakery was called the Boulangerie du Pain Pas Cher, which means the bread bakery of cheap bread. And it was a cooperative bakery, and it got the fisher people through the winter. And after that, they didn't have questions about, was she that kind of diva anymore? She was very attached. And I didn't put that story in, but I love that she responded to the call, and she did it by making a cooperative bakery that sold them bread.
That's amazing.
Yeah, very modern, even.
Yeah, cooperative. Especially here in Berkeley. I'm sure that Berkeley has a ton of those. I wish I had that story. Okay, the story that probably didn't get in far, a longer version was a car crash when Anna May Wong in the 1920s remade herself into a 1920s flapper. Outfit, hairstyle, everything, and lived the flapper life for a couple of years. And she bought herself a sports car because, she had made money from the films, and she bought herself a sport car and was a great drinker too, Anna May Wong. was partying, got in the car, started driving, and I was driving too fast, of course, and got into a police chase kind of thing and crashed her car. Well, I just mentioned that she did have a car and got it crashed, but I had this whole scene of the car chase. And then I looked at it and I said, this is like some bad movie. I've got to take this out. Although I had a fun time writing it. And I think part of being the writing process is a lot of times you have to write a lot to get to the little thing. And I just thought that for some reason that scene had to be in there, but I ended up taking it out. But the nuggets of so many things that I didn't know about her were really the best parts of it, through the archives and researching it all, was that she was a great reader, even though she stopped going to high school when she was 16. She just didn't think she needed that kind of education. She was getting way more education making movies and being out in the world. But she was a great reader, and later on became great friends with Bennett Cerf, who ran Random House, and who would send her books all the time, and she would just be reading all the time. And that she wrote articles, and that she wrote magazine articles and for movie magazines and other things. She wrote about marriage in one essay that she wrote. So, these were things that I didn't know, because all I saw was this Asian woman on the screen, and I was fascinated. Well, how did she get on the screen? But to have all that behind, and she was great with languages. She spoke German and French, which she learned in the 3 years she was in Europe, so that she could, in the end, before she left, she made a movie in each language with different casts. So with the French cast, she spoke French in the movie. With the German cast, she spoke German. It was the same movie, but with just different casts and different languages. And with the British cast, she spoke English. So I would say that those were the things that were most fascinating to me, that she had so many talents beyond just being that movie actress, and taking still photographs and what you see nowadays, but that there was that inner life and that other life. I think that fascinated me.
Yeah, because finding, you can read the quick biography, what the blurbs on Anna May Wong, but to know more about her, it's a big pleasure of your book to just enjoy the details on who she is as a person and beyond just
what you see, the facade, beyond the facade. There was much more. And I think it'd be really hard to write a novel if she didn't have that substance. When you think about it, if Sarah Bernhardt didn't have that other side of her, which wasn't just that actress, flamboyant actress that you see, but had that heart that she would do this for the fishermen. And who gets to buy a fort? I think that's fascinating. I think I want that fort. I'm going to buy that fort. but to turn it around and do something good for the people.
I think we have, our time is getting shorter, but I did want to talk, when working with history and sort of writing about history, how has history felt like more of an echo than, we like to think of history as just stuff we've come over, but it's not. So how was that, how do you find that history as an echo in your project?
History has been an echo in almost all my books. So you think I would understand it by now and step into the present day. But, I like the romance of history, if you're going to think about that. But, I think I've always really strongly believed that I went backwards from the get-go because I was trying to find out who I was, here as an Asian American in the Bay Area. How did I get here? And I always believe that you can't know who you are if you don't know where you came from. And I think that's the echo that I'm always hearing, even when I'm writing. And it's not about me, but it's that echo of how did we get here and who are we? And I think that has been the driving force in terms of I realize now too that it's so different. When I first began writing, I don't think I was tagged as a historical writer as much as I see nowadays. It's like everything is like you're either a historical writer or you're kind of grouped in this thing, which I found really funny because I mean I shouldn't say funny, but I've only written really about 1900 and forward, and it doesn't seem that far back to me in a way. But yeah, I would say that's why history is so important to me. It lingers. It's me trying to find out who I am at the same time as my characters are.
Wow, that's so lovely. I mean, yeah, I guess I can think about it that way that you just said. I also like that you felt like history is kind of present to you. Like it doesn't feel like it's so distant. I do think about that. I mean, I guess there's a sort of, you said echo, Elisabeth, and there's a way in which that echo of what I was writing about, the fact that 100 years ago, the most privileged women in Europe were just starting to have the right to access higher education, much less, get the vote, much less decide what they wanted to do with their lives. So I think about that was not that long ago, and I certainly thought about it, in the US when the end of Roe v. Wade happened, and I thought about like the generations of people fighting for gender rights and reproductive justice and how present that seemed, and how at that time I had a moment where I really wished that my book didn't feel very relevant at all. I wanted people to say, oh, it's so old-fashioned. There's times when, queer people and women and non-gender conforming people, how quaint it was that, and all those old days. And I felt like it was really horrifyingly not very distant and historical. So that was discouraging. But at the same time, when I was writing this book, I was thinking a lot about the trans feminist groups that I admire so much that are completely contemporary, like Ni Una Menos and Non Una Di Meno, and these groups that are working all over the world for reproductive justice and gender rights, and the right of people, no matter what their race or their religion or their sexuality, to have the lives that they deserve and to be treated with the dignity that that we all merit. So that was also kind of inspiring. I feel like part of why I wrote about Lina Poletti is that I thought if she were around right now, she would be in the piazzas with us saying like it is time for trans feminist justice. And so in that way also it didn't feel so different. Maybe that's the hopeful side, is that I think people have been fighting for a long time for these rights and these dignities and these lives. And I mean, it would be nice if we just got there and we didn't have to fight anymore, but we're not there yet. So so that's a kind of echo that goes on too.
So I think what did you terrible note right there. What sort of what are you working on next, and what kind of writers and writing has been inspirational to you? Kind of the ending question.
I'm just starting to think about the next project. Probably, my whole of books have been pendulum back and forth between my two cultures, writing about Chinese, writing about Japanese. I've come to think that there are certain themes that I keep writing about, and I think I'm going to go back to those themes, which probably would be, family, beauty, nature, things like that. And I've kind of set my sights on Japan again. And did you ask about reading? I spent so much time researching that I've only gone back to reading books now that from friends and people that have sent me manuscripts to try to catch up taught it. And it's been glorious in a way, you know, not having to run and sit down and worry about this paragraph or this line, but to be able to read other people's paragraphs and lines. So I'm just beginning to start working on something now. It hasn't even formed itself. It's just kind of like pages and hoping it'll bring me forward.
Wow, that's exciting. I also liked what you said about what a relief it is to read other people's lines.
And then you get frightened because they've done it so well, and you're thinking, "Oh, how am I going to do it?"
Yeah, I think that's the part I'm going to pick up, because I'm both like in the middle of thinking about a million things, and then also not yet at a place where I know what the next thing will look like. So, but I'm going to pick up the line you said about other people's lines on the page, and I've been rereading Dion Brand's The Blue Clerk, of which I am how can I even find a word for this? It just amazes me that a person can do that. And I already, you know, kind of venerate poets who can do these things, but I felt like yeah, this is maybe the fourth time I have reread The Blue Clerk, and I think it's just what you said. It's like I can see this on the page, and yet I have no idea how she manages to do that with language. I really love it. Also, I learned
The Blue Clerk.
The Blue Clerk. Yeah,
I'll have to look at it.
Yeah. Anyway,
Greedy.
for what it's
I apologize, because I just love hearing writers talk about other writers, you know, inspiration, all that. But I had a couple more questions just about your books and conversation with each other. And both of your books have Gertrude Stein. So
she got around.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did.
By looking at her, you wouldn't have thought what a wild girl she was, but she got around.
Yes.
And if you just wanted to maybe talk.
Well, you know, Gertrude Stein was, and L.S.B. Douglas was great friends with Carl van Vechten, who Anna May wrote the letters with, you know, so it was like this community that even though they lived in far distances, they somehow all connected. Again, in my book, I am not sure she ever actually met Gertrude Stein. It was alluded to, and you know, so many things are alluded to. We were in New York at the same time, so I'm thinking if they're in New York at the same time, they had to meet somewhere, because Carl, you know, Carl's beloved to Gertrude Stein. So, you know, there were just things there that made it work. It was in the same vein with Josephine Baker. They were both in Paris at the same time. So, you know, their paths had to cross, and especially in my book, because they were living the same kind of lives in so many ways. They both ran away. They were both trying to find their identity somewhere. You know, and Josephine Baker found it in Europe, and Anna May was still searching. So I had to have them meet.
Yeah.
Where does Gertrude come in yours, Selby?
Well, so many ways. I mean, as you said, Gertrude Stein was a center of interconnections, and I think she liked it that way. You know, she lived when she lived sort of walkable distance from Natalie Barney, who was also a person who really who you know was a writer and a hostess of cultural literary salons, but also somebody who really liked to gather people together. It was a great talent of hers. And so you could walk between their houses. And if you did that, you would walk down the street where Sylvia Beach had Shakespeare and Company, and Edwin Monnier, you know, had her bookshop as well. So there was a kind of geography of of like a, you know, it was a walkable distance between them, and they corresponded. And Josephine Baker as well, you know. So came over. I was thinking about the thing that you said about these kind of parallel lives of or these moments of parallel lives of Anna May Wong and Josephine Baker, the struggles that they had, you know, against the racism of the world that they were trying to move into, and their courage and determination. And yeah, I don't know, it's nice to think maybe that that there was some inspiration, even if it was glancing, even if We don't know if they met or they knew about each other, they read about each other, there was a picture somewhere, somebody said something. I like those. I think that's one thing I like about this kind of not exactly historical fact, is that the glancing parts are also important. You can
The seed
there.
is in the glancing part, isn't it? I mean, that thing that grabs you. It's that glance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, you don't know exactly how they met, or did they just, was somebody just saying, here's a translation of this, or did you see this photograph, or do you know what I heard, or there she is, or whatever. Just these moments that aren't solidified in historical fact.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been a sparky conversation, and I would say I found both of your books to be sort of sparking for the brain as you read it. You get into the lives of these characters, but you also are like, well, I've got to go see a movie, and I've got to go read this book, and I've got to go see who these characters are. And it's just a pleasure to read. And so thank you very much for being here and being at the Brooklyn Book Festival, if virtually. And everyone, please remember you can order books in the link below. And please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 18th year of presenting free literary programming. And if you're in New York City next week, the in-person festival takes place on October 1st in downtown Brooklyn. Come along. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.